Hello, music theory students. This is the video to help you complete your final term work B. This will look at how to analyze a minuet. You will have to use some of the chords, the new 6/4 chords that you've just learned, and this idea that the harmonies are extended over many measures instead of from beat to beat in many cases. So please pull out your handout. It should say chapter 22, the minuet on it. It's 22.1. This is in your handouts package. And this will help you complete the TWB that is 22.2. So the first thing that I often like you to do is just to listen to what this sounds like. Okay, so we're going to listen first to this short trio. It's the second minuet. Remember I said that minuets are in pairs. There's a minuet and a trio. We've actually already heard the minuet from this one in a previous video. Now we're going to listen to the trio that has this running bass line, which is a little bit unique in minuets. Okay, so what you'll notice is the cello is serving both as the bass line and it's serving as the melody in this case. So the analysis of the bass is going to be in some ways the trickiest part. But if you ignore the bass for the moment and look at the upper voices, they're not moving almost at all. So you can see that there is definitely just one chord here, one chord here, and one chord here. And an important thing to note is this is the kinds of the rhythms that we will see in minuets. Lots of rests, and you have to assume, and this is important for your homework, you have to assume that the last note that you hear carries through, especially in the bass. So in your homework, on the second one that you're going to analyze, there is two measures that essentially are blank in the bass. You have to assume that the bass note carries right through those two measures. Okay, the texture has been cleared and we're focusing on something else, but the chord, there hasn't been a chord change because the bass hasn't changed notes. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do when you are starting to analyze is figure out the harmonic rhythm. So figure out when the chords are changing. And it really happens not as much as you think. It looks like it could happen on almost every eighth note here, but when you look at the upper voices, they're moving much slower. Okay, so the first thing that you should do here is to write out the chord tones. Okay, in this case, the first is a tonic triad. D, if we just look at the first cello note, but we have a D and an F sharp. And here we have an A at the end here. So in this whole measure, we just are carrying a tonic triad. Now I want you to go pause the video at this point. I want you to pause the video and figure out the chords, mostly looking at the upper voices, but also taking into consideration often the first note of the bass. Once you get to hear things move a little bit faster, notice we have, there's a chord change because we now have a G sharp in here, and that's a really important moment right there. So at this point, we can look at this chord here at the beginning as we have a B, we have a D, we have an F sharp, and we have an A. Okay, and then you can figure out this last chord here and go there. Okay, so now that you've taken the time to figure out what all the chords are, this is what that should look like. You should have all the chords written above in something that looks like this. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so now you can see your chords, and from this you should be able to notice a pattern. So this is our tonic, this is a 2 chord, here's a dominant, and then we have 2 tonics in a row. Okay, so then at this point, then from that we can see we have one really long prolongation. So draw in your prolongation brackets here. And then we have movement at the end here to the dominant, right? So we have an A, we have the 2 of A, the 5 of A, E, G sharp. That G sharp is really important. And then we move back to A. So we have a long prolongation of the tonic, and then a short 3-measure prolongation of the dominant. So take your time now to write that in. Okay, now that you've written it in, sorry this is messy, this is what this should look like. So now it's at this point that it becomes really important to know where your chord tones are in your bass, because it's really hard to analyze melodic figures, because melodic figures always go from chord tone to chord tone and strong beat to strong beat. But of course, if there is a non-chord tone on a strong beat, it means that there's been some kind of rhythmic displacement, suspension, appoggiatura, and so forth. So what I want you to do now is go through this and find all your chord tones. And I'm just going to do it with a line above the bass. You could circle the note, but with using this program, it's harder for me to circle notes. So I'm just going to put a little line whenever there is a chord tone. So in this first measure, D, F sharp, and A, there's a chord tone. Oh, there's a chord tone on a weak beat. There's your A, and there's another chord tone. And so take a moment now to pause the video and go through and find all those chord tones. I'm going to do one more measure here because this is a tricky measure. So we have A, C sharp, E, and G. E, G. We have lots of chord tones in this one. A, G, oh, and then the final one back to E here. But you can go through all of this and find all of those chord tones.